Hello, and welcome to Conversations with Reverend G. I am Reverend Grenetta Mason, aka Reverend G, and I'm here every Monday night on WEMS Radio Live, bringing you spiritual conversations. My guests, they come from all walks of life with many different perspectives. We talk about life, we talk about love, and we talk about spirituality. We talk about spirituality from a practical point of view. How does it support you in your everyday life? How does it support you when you're going through whatever you're going through in life? We have our ups, we have our downs. And what tools do we have to support us at any moment in time? You know, I always talk about the spiritual toolkit, and the spiritual toolkit is the practices that work for you. It holds those practices. And it's personal because we each have different things that we do to support us. And my goal is to support you in living your best life in joy with grace and ease. You can find me every day on Facebook as Reverend Grenetta Mason with spiritual inspirational thoughts for the day. I'm also on YouTube as Rev Grenetta. So tonight I have a very special guest, and a guest, my friend, since I was 13 years old. So we go a long way back. And I'm excited to have her here and have this conversation. Juanita White is the owner and the director of Collier Graham Consulting. Hey, Juanita.
Hey, Grenada.
How
Good
are
to
you?
see you.
Good. I was like thinking, okay, we could talk about so many things. We go back 13 years, 13 years old, right? Think about
Yeah,
all the many years and all the many things that have happened over all of those years, right? I keep saying all the iterations, right? And all the different things that we've done since 13. So I have like a lot of fond memories of us growing up together, of us deciding to go away to college together, right? And that whole
right.
thing of supporting each other through our high school to get out to go, right? I always say to get out to go, right? And all the,
Yeah,
I feel, and I also say we had some special people looking out for us too, right? Because we got to have
right,
some experiences that we may not have had. You got to go away for a summer to prep school, right? I went to college for a summer. So all of those things supported us in saying, yeah, we want to go somewhere else. We want to do some other things, right? So I think about that and I appreciate all that, we did from 13 to now. So now let's talk about what you've been up to, right? And I guess we can start with, after my own story, Kaya Graham Consulting. Talk about what that is and how, you developed that. And yeah, that's good.
Woo. So when I started my consulting in the early 2000s, I did, and it was 2003 as a matter of fact, and I'd gotten my first contract with the Johnny Cochran firm, working with one of the attorneys to introduce him to Memphis. And so I was also doing some work with some nonprofits, some visioning work, some mission development, some board governance work that I'd gotten into in the mid 90s, mid to late 90s. And I Collier Graham is a family name. And I always said if I ever had a child, I would name my child that. And so I never had a child. And
Mm,
so Collier Graham became my baby. And so that's why I named it that.
mhm,
So that's our family. Whenever we would have a family reunion, it was Collier, McKinney, Graham. Those
mm,
were the three different men that my great grandmother married. And so those names. So I just lobbed off the McKinney and made it Collier Graham. So
mhm,
So I've been doing that in addition to working, but I do a lot of work with nonprofits from that time, and it's great work, and I love it, and that's what I do for a living too. So I
Mm-hmm.
have my consulting firm on the side, and
Mm-hmm.
I work with nonprofits
Mm-hmm.
for a living.
And right, you said you do like the governance, the vision, like, and really setting them up and getting them started, right? Did you so 2003 and just going into now, right, with your current job? Talk about the different changes you've seen happen over. And I always say, oh, there was pre-COVID, COVID, and next COVID, but what changes have you seen happen, and especially with us being on lockdown for a couple of years, and with your business?
Um,
Or even your nonprofit work that you do. You work for a nonprofit, right?
yeah, I work for a nonprofit that's an MSO, a management support organization for other nonprofits.
Okay,
So in
okay.
that year, it's amazing. I saw a little uptick in the work that I did with my consulting with nonprofits because they had the time to really dig deep and do that work.
Mhm,
In my job, it's amazing that our work really just grew because people were home. They
mhm,
weren't in their offices. They were continuing to do work. They were looking at how do we do our work and not be near each other, not be, I mean, people were living all over the place, but the work
mhm,
still was able to come together. So we were still able to offer like virtual trainings for them. So some organizations rethought their work. Some are not coming back into the office. They're going to work remotely.
mhm,
Uh, Even our office, we only work in the office 3 days a week. 2 days a week, we're home. When I do my consulting work, a lot of it's just like this. It's virtual.
mhm,
I haven't seen anybody in person yet,
mhm,
but the work continues because public charities work to support people. They
mhm,
support people who need food, who need clothes.
mhm,
They support veterans, the
mhm,
LGBTQ plus community, animals. So that work continued, and people found that they were really able to dig deeper um, in the work during
mhm.
COVID, and especially, unfortunately, after the George Floyd incident, murder, is what I like to call it.
Right.
So people were able to say, now, how do we take lessons from that and
Mhm,
apply that to our work? So then we were able to talk, we began to talk very honestly about racism in America and how it
mhm,
affects us.
mhm.
So um,
And you
but
were
the work
able to
continued.
have those conversations in with the nonprofits that you were working with.
Right, yeah. So we were helping them address DEI issues, or even before that, but helping the white people understand even what racism was about. Yeah, the week after that, no, it wasn't even the week. It was a few days after George Floyd's murder.
Mhm,
Uh, my white friends called, and one, they wanted to check on me to see how I was doing because I wasn't doing well. I was
mhm,
just blown away by what happened,
mhm,
but they wanted to talk and share a lot about, and to ask me questions, and I didn't, that was kind of heavy, but it helps me to learn. So
mhm,
in that particular time, I've had somebody tell me that they thought that after King's death that everything was fine, like they thought racism ended after King's death.
mhm.
Um, they thought like they don't live in our world.
Right.
So I was like, if a white person is killed, do you internalize that? Does that mean something or if a white person kills somebody, do you internalize that? And they were like, no, we don't even care. But
Mhm,
being black, whenever there's a murder and somebody black kills somebody, in the community, it's like, oh, because the news leads with that. And so
mhm.
that's what we hear, and that's what and so we're like, oh, even last night with Will Smith slapping Chris Rock,
Chris, right.
the whole thing was like black people and violence. What does that mean for our children? If a white man had slept a white man up there, white people wouldn't be having a conversation like, oh, what does that mean for our kids? How do we explain it?
Mhm,
So really, it became a time for us to really talk about stuff. And I realized how really wide the gulf is between blacks and whites in America, because they have a whole different idea of how
Mm-hmm.
this thing operates. I mean, and how
Mm-hmm.
racism operates. They don't know a lot of American history.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know the stuff that we have to know. So
Mm-hmm.
so educating them and helping them do that work to understand why are black people so poor. We're not poor because we're lazy. We're
Right.
poor because I use this term, intentionally left out. Like, I don't say
Mm.
underprivileged, low income,
Right.
marginalized. I use
Right.
intentionally left out,
Mm-hmm.
because in this
Mm-hmm.
country, black and brown people and Native Americans have been intentionally
Right.
left out.
Right.
So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and that brings me to my next question about this whole DEI. So I go back and I go back to when I was in corporate America trying to fight for us to just even be there and get somewhere. And they set up all the affirmative action committees, all of those kinds of committees, right? and, and,
Hmm.
and not really getting seeing the impact, because here we are still today still doing the same thing to in corporate America or in all this whole system as black women, right? So when I hear DEI, I'm a little skeptical, right? About is this just a conversation, right? Or it real impact, right? So what is your take on that?
Well, you know, being the cynic that I am, I one day I was going back throughout. Oh, remember the memory book, and I remember Ralph Patterson. What Ralph Patterson was our eighth grade American history teacher,
Yeah.
and remember he wrote in my book, "To my little cynic," because
Mm-hmm.
I never, you know, I'm always rolling my eyes, looking sideways and stuff, because I don't believe a lot of stuff. And so a lot of times DEI work is performative. And in 2020, we did see a whole lot of lip service to, oh, we're going to do better, and oh, we wanted to do this. And
Mm-hmm.
then as 2020 came, you know, 2021 came,
Mhm, mhm,
you saw less of that. But
mhm,
I work to hold people's feet to the fire on that work. It's
mhm,
everything from the little stuff in your organization. If
mhm,
you're going to buy food for a meeting, why are you always buying it from Panera or, you
mhm,
know,
mhm,
a big name? Why
mhm,
don't you look for a even a mom and pop or a black or brown owned business?
mhm,
It's as much as that. It's looking at pay equity in your organization and making sure that men aren't making more than women, that the the black and brown people aren't on the lower part of the scale,
mhm,
that
mhm,
they never are allowed to move up, because it's always, you don't have this, you don't have that. You know,
mhm.
in some businesses you need a master's to move up.
Right.
But if you have enough work experience, you can look at that and say, okay, this is equivalent to that. We
Mhm.
don't all the time see that happening with
Right.
black and brown people.
No, we
So
don't.
you have to make sure that you work and look at all through an organization how
Mhm,
you can embed DEI in that work, so
mhm,
that there is equity, there's diversity, and that people are included and that their voices are included.
mhm,
So
mhm,
that's the way I look at DEI, and it's really, it can be performative if somebody isn't holding an organization's feet to the fire.
mhm. And that, yeah, and that's what came to mind. You said there was a lot of talk about it in 20 and it died down, right? And are we holding them to it, right? Where is all that going? And I like that idea. We still have to stay there and hold them to the fire, because at the
Mhm.
moment it was big news. It was something to talk about, something to do to maybe appease us, right? And then it
Right.
goes into this next phases of, right, really, and I don't want to take away from the things that we see. There are some positive things that we have seen,
Oh
but
yeah.
not enough, right? I don't. So whenever I talk about it, it's more like, don't get me wrong, I acknowledge where we've come, right, and some of the
Right.
things, right, but
Mhm.
still, there's
Right.
just so much more, right,
and
and
and and it's, where could we be? You know, we've come a long way, but we've had to claw our way up this ladder. We've been in this country since the beginning. We
yeah,
should be on equal footing at this point. We
yeah,
shouldn't still be fighting for like a voting rights act. And I'm still confused about that, really.
yeah,
And I would think that I should know better, but it's like, if the Constitution at some point through one of the amendments gave everybody, every citizens the right to vote, once they gave women the right to vote and blacks, why do we need a voting rights
Right.
act? Why do we have
Yeah.
to? Aren't we citizens?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I still, I'm baffled by that. But the
Mm-hmm.
fact that we have to do that and we're fighting to get that passed should let people know, white people, brown people, black people, everybody understand that something is not quite right in this country.
Right, exactly. It's not, but we can get easily distracted from what's going on in this country when we pay attention to the world. I'll just say that,
Right.
right?
Yeah, I stand with the people in Ukraine, but I stand with the people in small rural communities and large cities who still can't pay utility bills, who still don't have affordable housing. I'm
Girl.
standing with everybody.
And if you go, I now, so I live in Harlem, right? And I work on 125th Street, and it just breaks my heart every day to just walk through there to see the number of people on the street, living on the street with, nowhere to have food. When somebody calls you, I think it cuts out or anything. So we're still there. But I think she got a phone call. When you get a
I'm
phone
sorry for
call,
that.
you came back, right?
Yeah, and then it has to reboot. Yeah, all right.
Yep, when you get a phone
Thank
call.
you.
So that was just, I was like one instance of after COVID because we stayed in. Now I'm just seeing so many more people on the street without places to go. So I don't know what it's all about, but I know that I wish we would pay more attention to how to support this whole homelessness situation. And here and it's everywhere. But since
Yeah.
COVID, there's a lot more that I'm seeing out there. Um, it's interesting. I talk about COVID before, and I started the show in 2019. So I rolled through COVID because it'll be 2 years, 2020, right? Because it'll be 2 years. So at the beginning, there it was like, oh, that was 2020 the beginning, right? We didn't really know what was going on, right? And then
Time flies.
yeah, it does. I was like, oh, before COVID, what were you doing? After COVID, what are you doing? The impact. And there were a lot of different people from different industries and different careers where we talked about what was the real impact, on them and their businesses and people, right? I talk about the impact and the mental health crisis that we're in, right?
Mhm.
Because I want to be an advocate for Black and Brown people seeking help, right? But I want to be a
Mhm.
realistic advocate. I don't want to say, oh, go get it, and then you don't have the money to pay for it or the services aren't available for you to get it, right? I would like to see us create and take the stigma off in the Black and Brown community, right? Make it accessible. Is there education that needs to be done? It's just like years of beliefs, I guess I would say, about how mental health and seeking help for mental health can support us. As I'm not because
Well, when you talk about the homeless situation in this country, and then a lot
Mhm.
of it can be traced back to the
Mhm.
ill effects of drugs and alcohol.
Mhm.
Um, there's poverty, and there are still mental health issues
Right.
that arise. Just, I mean, people are born, there are people in my family with mental health issues, severe mental health issues. And so,
Mhm.
there are a lot of reasons why people are on the street, and we need to address those things as a country. It's
Mhm.
hard to get someone with no insurance into a rehab so that they can get off drugs and then get
Mhm.
a new start.
Mhm.
We have that situation here. I mean, there are people on the street. I live downtown Memphis. And so, of
Mhm.
course, downtown, when I would go walking in the morning, I'd leave out in the morning. There's a guy standing lying right in front of our building, just, you know,
Nowhere to
I'm
go.
dodging him or walking around him in order to go on my walk. And all along the way, I see people, and it's sad. It's
Mhm.
disheartening. And there are women out there too. And I always wonder, where's your family? But a lot of
Mhm.
them are not in their homes, not because their
Mhm.
people put them out, but because they refuse to conform because of their mental health issues and their mental
Mhm.
instability. So, as a
Mhm.
country, we really need to address how do we help people?
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
and
and it's the big question. It's the age-old question, right? How do we help people, right?
mhm,
And I think about also with COVID, what we just went through, I had to keep my sanity, right? Because so many people were dying around me, right? And it was like, oh
yeah,
my God, right?
yeah,
And then not knowing how to go out or what to do, right? Having all those kind of issues also, right? Um, I looked to figure out how I was gonna keep my own sanity being, in all the different situations I was in. So when I talk about, the spiritual toolkit, and I talk about spiritual practices, and I talk about them from that perspective, right?
right.
How they support us throughout all the times and throughout everything that we go through. So let's shift and talk about spirituality a little bit. Talk about your spiritual journey. Like I know I've known you since you're 13, and I know you went to church when we
Right. Who didn't go to church in those days? Yeah,
but
but
exactly.
and so I grew up in a Methodist church, um, a small Methodist church,
Mhm.
uh, in the neighborhood where you could walk to church. And and so, I mean, it was fine. One of the things about traditional church was that it always scared you. It always made
Mhm.
you think that, if you're good, you ascend to heaven, this place in
Mhm.
the sky. If you're bad, you're gonna burn in hell. And so,
Mhm.
they would tell us stuff like Gabriel is gonna blow his horn, and then everybody, like, you go to heaven. They never really explained everything well. Like, I
Yes.
don't know whether if Gabriel did his horn and I wasn't dead yet, what happens, or
Right.
if
If you
people
didn't
are
hear
dead,
it,
will they
right?
rise up out of the graveyard? I mean, as a child, so you think, because I was, so inquisitive. I remember one day, even somebody's horn went off in the neighborhood, and I was a little girl. I mean, maybe 11 or 12, and I remember being so scared, thinking, like, is this Gabriel blowing his horn? Is it over with? And so, as I, but I continued. I stayed in the church when I lived away from Memphis. Of course, obviously, I didn't seek a church to go to. When I came back
Mhm.
home in 1980, I just immediately went back to church, because
Mhm.
when you were raised in the church, you gravitate to it. And what I gravitated to, and what I always take out of the church, was do unto others as you would have them do unto you. To me, that is what I live by.
Mhm.
So, out of all that other stuff, I just kind of took that out and took the took that from it, and the teachings of Jesus uh, in the New Testament, because the Old Testament was full of fire and brimstone and just awful things that
Mhm.
God was doing to people, and then
No.
the New Testament was different.
Mhm.
So around 1990 in our church, we've got a different kind of pastor. He was young, younger than
Mhm.
me. He
Mhm.
had a different idea, even though he was Methodist preacher. He was traditional,
Mhm.
but I think with him, his whole approach to everything was not so much fire and brimstone. So he
Mhm.
stayed with us because the Methodist Church moves people around. He stayed with us until about maybe the late 90s. And
Mhm.
then they switched him to another church. And at that time, he was thinking, well, maybe he didn't want to be in the Methodist Church. So he
Mm.
started a non-denominational church
Okay.
based on science of mind, which really just teaches us that there's one spirit in the universe, and that's God, and that
Mm-hmm.
he lives, that it's all in and around us. It's all in the air. There is no person, and
Mm-hmm.
that it's all good. Like we're all
Mm-hmm.
good. It doesn't teach us that we are bad and that we are to
Right.
do good things. And so when
Mm-hmm.
we pray, when there's prayer in our church, it's affirmative. It's affirmative.
Mm-hmm.
We aren't begging and asking somebody for
Mm-hmm.
something.
Mm-hmm.
It's already done. And we are
Mm-hmm.
thanking the universe for making that happen. So when
Mm-hmm.
I started attending that in like maybe 2003, I've stayed
Mm-hmm.
with that because it's just an easy practice, and it just embraces life, and it embraces the good in life and the good in the universe. So that's where I am now, and that's what guides my steps, really, that it's all going to be good, and it keeps me uplifted. And when bad things happen, I just look to the universe and say, I attract good, and good is going to come. And so that's kind of the way I live too. So
Yeah, it sounds like the Unity Church that we go to, Unity of New York.
hmm.
It's the positive, the good. It's about the good, and we do affirmative prayer. You know, the daily word, unity. That's
Right, yeah.
the
Hmm,
daily word.
yeah.
So yeah, I like that approach too. And when I think about like my spiritual journey and being able to study all different religions and then to find that spiritual space that works for me
Hmm.
is has been really good because I was like you, some parts of religion as we grew up, I didn't understand. So I kind of rejected it and said, oh, wow, right? But as
Right,
I've
yeah.
grown older and now I understand more, the teachers of Jesus Christ, I understand them and I understand them from a perspective of how they can work in my life. And but that took years, right, to
Right.
get there. And I got there by doing the science of the mind. I studied all of that,
Yeah.
right? And through that, I was able to really understand everything they were trying to teach us when we were growing up, right? There was just a perspective about it that I got it, right? And now I could read the Bible, the New Testament, and understand. And I remember when we were young, they were like, "Oh, you'll understand it. You'll be led to understand how to read the Bible." And did you always feel like if you didn't understand it, you weren't a good Christian, right? If you couldn't read it and understand, I did, right? There was this whole thing around being able to understand what was being said in the Bible, right? And it's interesting, even when I think about now, how my beliefs and spirituality are still kind of rooted in that Christian upbringing that we had, that I grew up. They're rooted in that. Totally gospel music. I still sometimes I the words take me like, oh Lord, I don't want to struggle anymore, right? But a lot of them make me feel really good, and uplifted. And so that's one of the practices for me that really work, is to listen to gospel music. Um, and that's totally from being in choirs and singing gospel music. What
Yeah, I love old gospel music. It's interesting that you mentioned Science of Mind, because our church is my Science of Mind book.
Mhm.
Because Science of Mind is what we used to. I mean, it's really a real science of mind, spiritual thought. But when I think about the Bible, I really see the Bible as a string of Canterbury Tales. I liken it to the Canterbury
Mhm.
Tales. That
Mhm.
stories that people told um, along the way as they were on this journey, and you know, and I don't know, then they picked and choose, Kings. they picked stuff out. They chose what they wanted and discarded others. Like there's a book of Thomas that got discarded along the way. There are a couple of
Hmm.
others,
The
King James
missing books of
version
the
and all of
Bible.
that.
That's
So
the
it's,
thing. Yeah.
it's just hard. And then people always kill me when they say, and Jesus said, you can find anything that you are against, and you can say you can find it in the Bible, and Jesus said it. I
Hmm.
mean, like Jesus or God or whoever, because sometimes those people are, they're people, sometimes they're not, they're interchangeable, all of that. Then you got the Holy Ghost, and all of that's just a mishmash of stuff that confuses people. But when you confuse people and you frighten them, then they have no choice but to believe stuff that they really don't understand. And what did Stevie Wonder say? When you believe in things that you don't
Don't
understand, then you
understand. It's
suffer. And
yeah.
and that's what happens. Anytime people
Hmm.
tell me that the only book they read is the Bible, well, I'll tell you something. I have tried to read that Bible, and I consider myself a literate person, spelling bee champion, all that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. And some of those words, some of those names in the Bible, some of that stuff in the I think I'm maybe on Leviticus. I
Hmm.
stopped years ago
Hmm.
because I can't pronounce those
Not the word.
words,
Yeah, I know. That's
and
so
so that
funny.
that limits my understanding. So
Right.
when I see somebody telling me that they, and I'm thinking like, how are you pronouncing that to even understand what they're talking about?
Hmm. Hmm.
But it's just I mean, people have used religion. I mean, masters use religion. I don't know if you saw like 12 Years a Slave. It's either 12 Years a Slave or the Nat Turner one. I think it was the one about Nat Turner. And in that, when the slave master had Nat Turner reading, being a minister, and he had to read from the Bible certain way. And then what he did when he realized, okay, they're using this to keep us under control, he would read the same thing, but he would read it with a different intonation. And then when he would read it differently, same words, then the people started hearing something different. Then it
Mm.
was like, oh, okay. So how you can use words to manipulate people
Mhm.
to your way.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, what has happened with Black people in Christianity. It's been used to keep us down.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so we've got
People.
to really free our mind and think about what it is, because all these evangelicals running around here calling themselves, Christians, but the stuff that they're doing to keep
It's
people
not good.
down in the name of religion, that it doesn't jive with the way Black people have seen religion for all,
Mm.
all of our lives.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
it's
it's like, okay,
interesting.
poppycock.
Yeah, when I the part about when you were saying you tried to read the Bible. Well, I have this big Bible with like five to three, four versions in it, right?
Right, yeah.
So just to be able to understand, and we didn't have all those versions when we were growing up. I think at some point the Good News Bible might have come into our hands, but we were really on that King James version, like you
Yeah.
said, trying to pronounce those words and trying to understand what it was saying, right? And I like the Psalms because it's like poetry, right?
Well, yeah, I love.
And
I mean, in
yeah,
college, I studied the Song of Solomon. I thought it was beautiful, and Psalms
yeah,
is beautiful. There's some beautiful things
exactly.
in the Bible. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. And
in
that's
the
why
Old Testament. Yeah.
yeah, I say it's a wisdom text because there is wisdom to be found
Hmm.
in the Bible, right? And it's not the only wisdom text. There are
No,
several different wisdom texts. So I think when Christians get into it's the only book, and there's to me you're stuck because it's not the only,
only
right?
no.
Is one of them. There are many paths to the same thing. We're all going for the same thing, but we are whatever Christian doctrines we want to follow. The Hindus have their way, the Buddhists, everybody, but everybody, as you have mentioned earlier, that one God, that one universal force, the universe, that one energy is what everybody's going for. So it's interesting too when we talk about religions that are inclusive as opposed to exclusive, right?
Hmm.
you know,
Right.
and, you know, Christianity is not inclusive, right? And neither, I don't think Judaism is, nor Muslims. They're all, this is the way it is, and we are the ones, and ours is the right way, rather than let's all recognize that there's one God and we each can do it our way.
Right.
So it's interesting when we look at religion and the impact, though, because I was kind of questioning whether I could be Reverend G, right? Because I don't know the Bible, right? I don't know how to quote the
Of course.
Bible, right? And I'm just Grenetta, right? I still do what I do, right? I studied religion and I became an ordained minister, right? But that didn't change who I am and who I present myself as. It gave me a lot of knowledge, supporting me in supporting others, right? But
Right.
I I didn't, I didn't change, right? I am
Right.
still that same 13-year-old you met with the craziness and the crazy questions, and I still cuss, and I have to kind of pull that back, right? You know what I'm saying? So,
Right. I mean, the essence of people really don't change over time. I had to tell somebody recently who they thought they knew me, but they did know me. I don't know who they know. I said because I am not I believe in love so much.
mhm,
I believe in love, and I believe in loving loving people and loving on people and helping and supporting people. And I would
mhm,
never, somebody accused me of writing something intentionally to hurt somebody's feeling. I go, no, you don't know me, because I don't operate that way. I
mhm,
would never intentionally hurt anybody, because I don't want anybody to hurt me, but one, there's no
mhm,
reason to live life that way. But
mhm,
back to you and when we were 13, you probably don't even remember this. I was the shy girl put in your class, because they I had been separated from all of the rest of the people. And then they put me in the class, and I remember you came up to me and you said, and you're gonna laugh because this is what you said to me. You said, "You're that smart girl, right?" And I was like, "I guess." And that's how. And your aunt knew my sister, and your aunt Barbara, I think it was, had told you
right.
to come and meet me, because I was like, maybe she had talked to my sister. But those
Right.
were your words to me. You're that smart girl, right? Because I just that's
But you
how.
were that smart girl because you knew a lot, right? I can think about all the smart stuff you did, right? But you remember that Latin, how you used to have to do that Latin for me, right? All the time because you loved Latin,
Oh,
right?
I love Latin. Yes, yes,
And I
I
always
love
needed
Latin.
you to help me with that Latin, right? Because it just came so naturally for you and not for me. And you were a writer. Let's talk about your writing and how back then, I mean, you've always been a writer. So where are you with that now, and what have you published? And it's like a writer back then, it's like writing for the newspaper, writing stories, writing these things we did. How's that evolved, and where are you now with your writing?
Well, let me see. I wrote for years, from like 1995, 96 to 2013, for a Black women's magazine locally. Um,
Mhm.
and so then once Tina died, and it was the publisher died, it was her daughter did something crazy with it. It's not even in existence. I wish that she had just sort of like sold it, because I had a friend who wanted to buy it, and then I could have
Mm.
really been the editor of a magazine, but that didn't work out. She wouldn't sell it, so I did that. But I wrote something in 2020 that ended up in Medium. I write a blog like maybe once, twice a year for the company I work for our
Mhm.
newsletter.
Mhm.
But what I'm doing now, and I wanted to do when I turned 65, is I'm writing essays about my life. So I'm delving into
Mm.
things from the time I was a little girl, all kinds of things that have happened to my life, things I've experienced. Some of the things uh have taken me back to just, I'm really like going back to who I was when those things happened. And so I sit there and let some things ruminate, and I'm, you know, they're marinating in my head, and so I'm just sort of writing these things. And so I'm going to write them over the course of this whole year, and
Mhm.
maybe have them printed up and bound. And then I'm going to have, like I did with my poetry when I
Mhm.
turned, maybe I was 30, 31,
Mhm.
and I published this book of poetry, and I had this whole poetry thing in a bookstore. And I used to read poetry in the library, and I had a library card, catalog number, and all of that.
Mhm.
So I'm going to like publish the book, I'm going to read it, um, and have people read like excerpts from it, and then I will talk about it and
Mhm.
really sit down. It will help people know a little bit more about who I am. It's helping me know a little bit more, learn
Mhm.
a little bit more about who I am as I'm sitting down and reminiscing and writing those things. Because I think a lot of what I've experienced and what's happened to me, the way I grew up, the way I've grown
Mhm.
up, to even get to these 67 years, it's been a wild ride, a fun ride. So
Mhm.
I'm just letting that sit here. So on Friday nights, that's when I write. Friday is my night to be alone,
Mhm.
and so I spend time writing.
Mhm. And so right now you're writing the book. I was going to say, what inspires you? Do you find yourself like on Friday nights, is it about the book, or are you just inspired to write about certain things? You're currently not writing for a magazine, but you're blogging.
Yeah, but it's really work block. It's
Oh,
around work
work blogging.
stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so it's not like, I'd love to do that and maybe get into that space. Sometimes, writing can be, it's easy, and sometimes not. I still write poetry. If I'm lying in the bed,
Mm.
I write poetry. I wrote
Mhm.
something recently about all the men I've ever loved in my life, and I took each one of them from the time I was like 20 something until now, and
Mhm.
just wrote at just a page, I mean a paragraph about each one of them,
About
and that
wow.
was kind of interesting. I write poetry,
Mhm.
but what inspires me when I'm sitting at home on Friday, it's just time that I'll say, okay, you're gonna take 3 hours on a Friday night if I'm not at a basketball game, and I'm just
Mhm.
gonna sit down and I'm going to write, and so
Mhm.
that's how I do it. There's no real
Mhm.
inspiration except what's in my head. What am I going to write about now? Am I going to write about the time this happened or this? And I'm writing out of sequence, so it's not all starting from when I was a 9-year-old girl. It may
Mhm.
start when I'm 32. One started when I was 32. One when I was 9. And I go back
Mhm.
and forth in
Mhm.
age and time. So.
I did a one woman show. It's like 20 minutes, right? And I had to capture from a little child all the way through, right, till now. I also started writing my story, but I
Yeah.
I did it in like I learned this way of writing a book where you do all your chapters first, your titles, you go through this whole thing, a 5-minute thing. So then I got to the part where I was writing about each of the things. So I started when I was little on Ingle Street. Then I went through to school. So mine is in sequence, right?
Hmm.
And I have you just reminded me that I haven't been back to it because if you don't allocate the time, it won't get done. So I
Right.
had allocated one morning a week to write. And in sticking with that, and I always talk about consistency, we talk about the things that we want to do, we just stop and start. And consistency is really important. And I saw I haven't picked it up since I stopped doing it, every week, right?
Hmm.
And I think about that too, consistency in spiritual practices, right? I talk about, the spiritual toolkit where we have a lot of different things we do that support us. Like now I'm on this whole painting thing, and it's just like, wow, I just want to sit down. I don't even know how to paint, but I'm just throwing the paint on the canvas, right? And it's Yeah, it makes me feel good and I want to do it. So I feel
Right.
like it's bringing joy to sit there and I just want all the different colors, to do that. That's one of the things I've just started to do. And it's not what I find is I used to do a lot of going and just going and right. You have to sit down, right?
Yeah, you have to stop for a minute, and
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be a lot of times. Like I said, for me, it's like a 3 hour thing. But yeah, like you, I used to paint, and
Mhm.
so I used to make jewelry that was sold in one of the local stores here. And
Mhm.
I may start doing that again. I may do something different. I want to do photography.
Yeah, photography, that's an interesting one. I always think I'm a lightweight photographer with my cell phone, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. But, what would you say are your top three go to spiritual practices?
God, I don't. Let me see. Um, um, and it's interesting, weird, but if I'm stressed or if I'm having anxiety about something,
Mhm.
I take a deep breath and center myself. And
Mhm.
that's something that we do in our church before the teacher. We don't call him minister pastor, we call him by his name, but he's the
Mhm.
master teacher. So he's our
Mhm.
teacher. And before he does his lesson, we have a moment where we do a centering, where we
Mhm.
center and we get ready to receive. And
Mhm.
so if I am feeling stressed, it's also wrapped into my yoga practice. I just take the
Mhm.
time to center and
Mhm.
allow the universe to speak to me, to calm me down, to surround me with
Mhm.
good energy. I have to remind myself, you got this, it's going to be okay. And so I do that. And that's one of the main things that I do. There was a poem
Mhm.
that at one point in my life, I was just like going through something, changing jobs, didn't know where the next thing was going to come from. And
Mhm.
there's a poem called, I don't even know the name. I know his name is like Philip Booth, I think. But
Mhm.
it said, lie down and the sea will hold you. And I love that because it was saying just get rid of fear and
Mhm.
just lie back and
Mhm.
everything will be all right. So I
Mhm.
I do that. I'll read that poem. I did have it taped
Yeah.
up in what I called my office here, and I would
Yeah.
open up the door and I
Mhm.
would read that, and it would help. And so those are the two main things that I do. And then the third thing I do
Mhm.
always is my music. And
Mhm.
back to the gospel music, if I really want to, I'm doing all that. I love Sam Cooke and the Soul Stirrers. I
Mhm.
love Al Green's gospel music. I love, love, love Aretha Franklin's um,
Mhm.
Amazing Grace
Mhm.
album and
Mhm.
her You've Got a Friend. What a Friend We Have in Jesus has always been one of my favorite songs. That and I Come to the Garden Alone. And so I will return to Aretha Franklin singing What a Friend We Have in Jesus. And those things really have helped me so many
Mhm.
ways. Sam Cooke's
Mhm.
Trouble Don't Last Always.
The
Um,
music touches your
the
soul,
music
right?
touches my soul, yes.
Mhm.
Duke
Mhm.
Ellington said in the preface to his autobiography, music is my mistress and she plays second fiddle to no one. And
Mm.
that's me. That's yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. I know you're a movie buff too. I remember you used to go to movie how many times a week? Like it felt
I
like
go to movies. I go to movies so much, discerning as I am. So you'll never catch me in a movie pretty much between in the spring and summer because that's not when the movies I want to see come out. So I'm usually in the movies anytime between October and maybe February, simply because some movies get to Memphis late. But now with
Mhm.
streaming, I can see them all. But yeah, yes,
Mhm.
if they're Oscar bait movies, I'm there. I like movies
Mhm.
that's going to make me think. I don't like action, adventure
Mhm.
movies, car crashes, and stuff
Mhm.
like that. Yeah.
Mhm. Things that are gonna make you think, right? You know.
Yeah, or just Yeah, make
Or
theme
just
like
have.
Swan Song. Did you see Swan Song? It was with Mahershala Ali and Naomi Harris. It was so good. It made me cry at the end. It was
Mm,
so good.
hmm it's almost time for us to go. I think one of the
Wow.
things I wanted to talk about was how do you feel you would like to make a contribution? You know, I do this show saying like, oh, is there anybody listening that I can maybe help, or that something that somebody could say to support them? And I know I think about the different um things that I advocate for, you know, the things that I want to see change and make a difference, right? And my thing is about joy. I know everything can't be happy, but just finding a moment of joy. And what does it take for you to find that joy? And I believe that just as when you know how you go down a negative road and you start thinking negative, and then you got like five negative things building on top of each other, and you're digging that hole, you could do the same thing to come up to a level of joy and a level of peace, you know, through even just a simple gratitude practice, right? So that's what I'm, the idea is to be supportive of people and have them
Hmm.
have ways to just deal with this world as it is. And I think spirituality is one of those ways that I've seen that supports everybody, because it's not confining. You get to create what works for you. It's each individual, you know. And when we get into religion, it's like you have to do it this way, you have to do it this way. But I like the idea that we get to define what tools work for us. Did I even ask you a question? Right.
No,
I
I
know,
think you were trying to get there. So
because you were really quiet, right? I was just giving a summary, right? But you know, as I was thinking about having you on the show, I was thinking about how we used to talk on the phone after work for hours. Remember, after work, after school for hours, right? And
yes,
think about how we tied up the phone line, right? Because
yeah, so
that,
much so. Yeah.
that was like, there was, you couldn't have call waiting, and you couldn't have all of that. And it just reminds me of every day after school till you watch Johnny Carson or something, right?
What I still try to figure out. We had been together all day.
I know,
What
right?
were we talking about? I don't even know what we were talking about.
Right,
If it wasn't
exactly.
schoolwork, it was just I don't know what we were talking about. I just
Right.
remember that we had dreams, we had
Yeah.
aspirations, and
Yeah.
we wanted three things. We wanted a job, a car, and an apartment. That's I remember us talking about. That's all we knew at 15, 16 that you
Right.
could have. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
even know if we said what we were going to be when we grew up. We just knew we wanted a car, job, and
Well,
an apartment.
I remember I had to write a paper what I want to be, and you helped me, right? We had,
Oh, I remember that. I remember that. I remember being on the phone talking about that. Yeah.
yeah, being on the phone talking about, well, what do you want to be, right? And having to write that paper about it. So it's just, there are so many memories of how we wanted to get away too. You went to Yale, I
Oh
went
yeah.
to Massachusetts. I followed you. We were like, we getting up out of here, right? But you were the one who was only going to Yale. I'll never forget that, right? That was the only place you were going to go. And remember, the
Yeah.
teacher tried to beat you into submission. Apply to Memphis State. You was like, nope, I'm going to Yale, right?
Yeah. I think they maybe applied to Smith. Remember you and I went to on a Saturday morning, we rode the bus to go to the library to meet this woman from Smith. And we
Mhm.
applied to Smith. I know I did. I'm like, I knew I wasn't going to a girls'
Yeah,
school,
yeah.
but we applied anyway. That was my last school, so I could make it three. So it was like Harvard, Yale, and Smith. And
Mhm.
I still remember Miss Little calling me into the thing, and she said like into the guidance class, she said like both Harvard and yeah, but it was like Radcliffe then, and
Right,
they
exactly.
accepted you. But if you're going to one, the other one is going to turn you down, so they can give that scholarship to somebody else. So where are you going? I said I'm going to Yale. So she said Radcliffe said, and they will turn you down so that you can, go to Yale, even though they had accepted me. But it was like, I knew where I was going.
You knew.
I just think of some people would have called us arrogant.
That's
Remember
what she
you and
was
the lady
calling
said,
you,
"You're not
right?
going to Vanderbilt.
Right.
Don't unpack your bags."
Yeah, that's what she
Some
told me, right?
children
Don't
with
unpack your
dreams.
bags, right? Yeah, yeah.
And
But
I know that there are some kids out there like us. I
yeah.
know that people like us exist, from the kind of friendship that was very supportive.
Hmm.
I think we just have that kind of friendship where, everybody else was on senior day. They had everybody. We were walking up and down the street because on a hot day by ourselves. I don't know how we ended up like that in those shoes that we couldn't walk in.
Right, exactly. But yeah, it was like we inspired each other to go, and we were gonna, like you said, have that car, apartment, and a job, right? And we were gonna leave, right? And it's interesting
All
that
right, yeah.
you left, and I remember when I was in Massachusetts, I was either gonna go to New York or California. And I ended up coming to New York, but you were able to do both. You came to New
Right,
York
yeah.
and you went to California, right? So I think about how we had set all of that up, right? And
Right,
then, and it's really about what comes to mind now is you get to design your life now. We designed that back then
right,
when
yeah,
we were young, and now
yeah.
it manifested, right, in the way that we saw it when we were young. And we still get to do that now. We get to
Hmm.
decide what we want, design it, and have it manifest in the way that we want. And that's what we did together from that 13-year-old till we went to college. And I was like, you're going to Yale. Well, I'm going to go to Massachusetts. It's close to you, right? So
Right, yeah.
it's a really interesting when I talk about spiritual practices and manifestations, and I talk a lot about the thoughts you keep, right?
Hmm.
And the thoughts and the visions and all of that. We had all of that, and that's why we see and we manifested what we wanted. So it is time, and it has been really great talking to you and connecting in this way, right?
Yeah,
Um,
same here. I love it. You're my oldest friend, really. Um, you're the
yeah,
friend I have that's been my friend the longest. I mean, there are some people that I've known maybe a little longer because we went to elementary school, but basically, you're my oldest friend. So
yeah,
the longest
exactly.
duration of friendship. So
Right. Exactly. And my two kindergarten friends died, right? The two,
right, yeah,
yeah, with this whole thing. So it was like I knew them in kindergarten, and then there that I kept in touch with, both of them died.
right,
And then I keep in touch with you. So you're my oldest living friend, right?
yeah,
Um
yeah.
right. But yeah, so I am grateful for all the years of our friendship, right? And I thank you for showing up tonight.
Thank you for inviting me and having me. This has been wonderful. I love you.
I love you too.
Bye.
Bye.